On the evening of June 10th, 2025, the sterile execution chamber at Florida State Prison in Rayford fell silent as the state carried out the final sentence of Anthony Waywright. The lethal injection, though clinical in process, could not sterilize the dark legacy that led him there. For more than 30 years, Waywright waited in a cell with no future haunted, not just by concrete walls but by the memory of a crime so savage it still echoes through time. The story began not with murder, but with a series of petty crimes that hinted at something dark or beneath the surface parole violations. Burglary is a decade behind bars in North Carolina, but it was inside Carteret County's minimum security prison in 1994 that destiny met its accomplice. There he crossed paths with Richard Hamilton, a fellow inmate with his own violent past, and together, they made a decision that would steal lives, devastate families, and end in an execution chamber decades later. They escaped prison with ruthless precision, stealing a Cadillac, arming themselves with stolen rifles, and carving a path across state lines. Not toward freedom, but toward carnage. On April 27, 1994, their descent into cruelty met its most innocent victim, 23-year-old Carmen Tortora Gayert. A nursing student and mother of two, Carmen had just finished grocery shopping outside of Winn-Dixie in Lake City, Florida, unaware that her final moments were about to be stolen by strangers with guns and no conscience. She was forced into her Ford Bronco at gunpoint, terrorized, abducted, and driven deep into a pine-laced wilderness off State Route 6. What happened in those woods was brutal beyond words. Waywright first tried to strangle her, then to erase her voice forever. He pressed a .22 bolt-action rifle to her head and fired twice. Her body was left discarded like a broken object in the underbrush, while the men fled into the southern night. Panic spread quickly. Carmen never arrived to pick up her children. Her husband and father raised the alarm. Statewide search began, but the truth would not surface until Waywright and Hamilton were spotted just a day later in Mississippi. A high-speed chase turned violent, gunfire erupted. Both fugitives were injured, caught, and finally caged. In custody, Hamilton crumbled. He confessed it. All the escaped the abduction. The killing, he drew a shaky map, guiding investigators to a patch of forest he barely remembered. Still, it led them to Carmen. Her remains were found exactly as he described, buried beneath branches, riddled with bullets, and surrounded by silence. But she was no forgotten victim. She had a name, life, a family who would never stop mourning. Investigators called it one of the most disturbing crimes they'd ever seen. She had no chance, one said. And so began a legal odyssey that would stretch across generations. Appeals, delays, legal limbo, but the facts never changed. Waywright murdered a young mother, tore a hole in a family that never healed. And on June 10th, the state of Florida declared that his time had come. His execution was carried out in silence, but the questions still scream. What drives a man to such inhumanity? What turns a petty criminal into a predator? May 2nd, 1994, the case broke wide open. It was just after 4 o'clock a.m. when Tina Wheeler, a dispatcher at the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, studied the crude map drawn by Richard Hamilton during his confession. Something clicked. The sketch resembled a wooded area she recognized. An overgrown patch of land just off State Route 6. Deputies, Mel Black and Albert Jones, were immediately dispatched. By 4:30 a.m., they were combing through the dense foliage in near darkness. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. Deputy Jones caught the scent first, something sour and unmistakable drifting through the humid morning air. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the pines, they spotted her. The decomposed remains of Carmen Gayert lay hidden beneath a canopy of brush and pine needles. Her life stolen, and her body discarded like it meant nothing. The case, now officially transferred to the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, turned from a search to a homicide investigation. Her remains were transported to District 4 Medical Examiner's Office in Jacksonville, where Dr. Margarita Aruza began the painstaking work of uncovering what had been done to her. What she found was grim. Carmen was missing several teeth and the hyoid bone. In her neck, a key indicator of strangulation or suffocation was gone. The implication was chilling. Carmen had suffered far more than a shooting. There had been a struggle, a brutal one. Deputies returned to the crime scene. This time, they searched with surgical precision. Their second sweep paid off. In the undergrowth, they found the missing teeth and the hyoid bone, shattered and displaced, further supporting the theory that Carmen had been forcibly suffocated before being shot in the head. As the pieces came together, charges followed swiftly. The Florida Supreme Court later described the crime as a calculated, cold-blooded execution. Carmen had not just been abducted. She was tortured, dehumanized, and discarded. After their shootout with the Mississippi State Trooper, both men were in custody. Waywright eventually confessed, admitting to the abduction and robbery, but pointed the finger at Hamilton when it came to the actual killing. But forensic evidence quickly unraveled his deflection. Investigators recovered sperm from the back seat of Carmen's Ford Bronco. DNA analysis was conclusive, the likelihood of it belonging to anyone other than Anthony Waywright was described in court as astronomically low. The science didn't lie. The evidence was overwhelming. In July 1994, a grand jury formally indicted both men on multiple charges, each enhanced by firearm use. State Attorney Jerry Blair wasted no time. Given the brutality, he pursued capital punishment. The courts agreed. The presiding judge ruled that the crimes met the legal standard for being especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, a critical requirement for seeking the death penalty in Florida. Carmen's family, emotionally devastated but unwavering, was clear in their demands. No life sentences. They wanted justice in full. To them, anything less was unacceptable. But there was one major hurdle: finding an impartial jury. The case had exploded in the media. In Hamilton County, emotions were too high. The entire region had followed every twist. So, the trial was moved to Clay County, where a jury was seated much faster. Meanwhile, behind bars, the horror didn't end. While awaiting trial at Clay County Jail, both Waywright and Hamilton began plotting another escape, this time even deadlier. Intelligence gathered by corrections officials revealed a disturbing plan. They intended to kill a correctional officer to break free. The jail took no chances. Both inmates were immediately moved to maximum security, and security at their court appearances was heightened significantly. Authorities weren't just dealing with murderers, they were dealing with dangerous, calculating predators. Finally, in May 1995, separate juries heard the full cases against each man. On May 30th, both panels returned the same verdict: guilty on all counts. Then came the sentences. On June 1st, the jury in Anthony Waywright's case unanimously recommended the death penalty. In Hamilton's case, the vote was 10-2, still enough under Florida law. On June 12, 1995, Judge Vernon Douglas made it official. Anthony Waywright, age 24, and Richard Hamilton, age 32, were both sentenced to die in Florida's electric chair. For Carmen's family, justice had a name, but closure, that was another story. Over the next 3 decades, Anthony Waywright lived a silent, invisible life behind the walls of death row. His world shrank to legal filings, appeal deadlines, and the ticking of a clock that never quite stopped. His attorneys argued that his trial had been flawed, that his defense counsel failed to present key mitigating evidence, including a history of childhood trauma, mental illness, and psychological abuse. Had the jury known more, they argued, perhaps the outcome would have been different. They pointed to signs of untreated mental health issues, fragments of a shattered psyche never fully addressed. But despite years of legal sparring, appeals failed. The court stood firm. The crime, they ruled, was too brutal, too calculated, too cruel to overlook. In the end, after 30 years of appeals and last-minute motions, justice caught up with Anthony Waywright. Behind the cold finality of Anthony Waywright's execution lies a long and painful saga of justice delayed and lives forever altered. While imprisoned, Waywright kept mostly to himself, spending countless hours poring over legal texts in the prison law library, preparing for the relentless wave of appeals that would consume the next 3 decades of his life. Described as distant and withdrawn, he never received a visitor, living as a ghost behind bars. His legal fight began soon after conviction, with appeals first filed by Richard Hamilton and then by Waywright himself. For years, courts denied every petition, even dismissing new DNA evidence submitted in 2023 as insufficient. By 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court closed the door on his final appeal, officially exhausting his legal options, and bringing the shadow of execution closer than ever. Meanwhile, Carmen Gert's family, worn down by time and grief, grew impatient with the slow wheels of justice, describing her as the sweetest girl on the face of the earth, and lamenting that their mother and father never lived to see the killers held fully accountable. In a cruel twist, Richard Hamilton died behind bars in early 2023, leaving Waywright alone as the sole prisoner linked to the 1994 crime. Finally, in May 2025, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Waywright's death warrant, setting the execution date for June 10th, though his lawyers made one last desperate attempt to delay the inevitable with a final evidentiary hearing. The court swiftly rejected it. Judge Melissa Olin declared there was insufficient evidence to proceed, sealing Waywright's fate. And so at 54 years old, nearly 31 years after that horrific day, Anthony Waywright was executed, his story a stark reminder of a justice system strained by time, tragedy, and the unyielding demand for closure.